Ladies and gentlemen, our program will begin in just a moment. Ladies and gentlemen, our program will begin in just a moment.
All right, I'm getting on now. Bye-bye.
Okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, our program will begin in just a moment. Good day, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to AJC at the Conventions 2020, AJC's virtual advocacy programming on the sidelines of the Democratic and Republican National Conventions. Please be advised that AJC is a nonpartisan 501c3 nonprofit organization. As such, AJC does not endorse or oppose political parties or candidates. As a reminder, AJC will be hosting identical panels on the sidelines of both the Democratic and Republican National Conventions. We are delighted to be joined today by Representative Yvette Clarke, who will be joining us shortly, Senior Democratic Whip, Chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, Immigration Task Force, and member of the Jewish Latino Congressional Caucus and the Congressional Caucus on Black-Jewish Relations, Representative Adriano Espaillat, Co-Chair of the Congressional Latino Jewish Caucus and member of the House Committee on Foreign Affairs, and Daisy Khan, Executive Director of the Women's Islamic Initiative for Spirituality and Equality. Our esteemed guests, in a conversation moderated by Melanie Marin-Pell, AJC Managing Director of Regional Offices, will explore our nation's long struggle with racism, examine the impact of U.S. immigration policies, and debate whether pluralism or particularism is winning the day. After we hear from Melanie, Representative Clarke, Representative Espaillat, and Ms. Khan, we will take your questions. You may email your question to questions@ajc.org, that's questions plural, or use the Q&A feature in Zoom. Melanie, you and our esteemed guests have the floor.
Thank you so much, Daniel, and thank you all so much for joining us. I really want to begin by thanking each of you, each of the three of you, for being such important and valued partners to AJC. You have each made such meaningful contributions to our shared work, and we are truly, truly grateful. We're also grateful for your time. We know how busy everyone is, and so hopefully we can dive right in. So Daniel framed this conversation for us as an opportunity to address some of these challenges, some of the challenges facing minority communities today, and a chance to really explore some of the struggles that our nation has long faced with racism, the impact of U.S. immigration policies, and then, as he mentioned, to discuss whether pluralism or particularism is winning the day. The CEO of AJC, David Harris, has described us on many occasions as proud pluralists. And indeed, the belief that pluralism is a strength of our democracy is an essential tenet of our mission and our work. And yet, we still see a nation that is riven by divisions, by suspicion, and we see incidences of anti-Semitism and racism and othering on the rise. So Congresswoman Clarke, I know that you have a bit of a time constraint today, so I will direct our first question to you. You grew up in the Flatbush neighborhood in Brooklyn as the daughter of immigrants, and you now represent that same community, which is extremely diverse and includes immigrants from around the world with a range of legal statuses and experiences. So you understand the realities of a wide array of minority communities in the US and how those communities are impacted both by national policies and by the ethos of the moment. So from your vantage point, wearing all the hats you wear with the life experiences you've had, how are minority communities faring today in America?
Well, first of all, let me say good afternoon to everyone, and let me thank AJC for holding this very important conversation. I think that minority communities are faring poorly, to be blunt. This pandemic has disproportionately impacted all of the sort of various minority groups, ethnic communities throughout New York State, and certainly throughout the 9th Congressional District of New York. And the challenges given the level of essential workers that live within these constituencies, the numbers of individuals who are recently unemployed, every social dynamic that undergirds healthy communities have been crumbling beneath these communities. So it's been quite the challenge.
And what would you say, what would step one be to try and turn things around? Where do you think we need to begin?
Well, I think that there needs to be a renewed commitment to investment. And when I say investment, I mean a robust public health infrastructure. Many of these communities are sort of on the tail end of a commitment that our government has had for generations to welcoming immigrants, to providing a social safety net that enables people to be upwardly mobile. And over, I would say the past 3 decades, we've seen a decline in those investments, maybe even longer. As a result, the public health infrastructure that needed to have been in the midst of immigrant communities were non-existent when the pandemic hit. And the ability for us to be able to social distance and really meet a lot of the mandates that we need in a public health emergency were just not readily accessible. And so, as a result of, again, those lack of investments, and we can talk about that as well when we talk about the type of housing, the decrepit nature in which many of those families live, the lack of translational materials so that those who speak multiple languages are receiving the same consistent message. All of these dynamics we did not have in place, so that it has been, I would say, just a compounding of the challenges that more wealthier, less diverse communities face in a pandemic. So I think that there's a need for real investment and commitment to seeing every life as being precious, and thereby having a concerted effort among all people to make sure that we take care of the most vulnerable in our society.
Thank you. And Congressman Espaillat, I would like to turn to you and pick up on a theme that Congresswoman Clark raised about a little bit about the immigrant experience and the promise that we make to people in this country. And I want to note first that you have a remarkable personal story as someone who has experienced firsthand both the successes and the challenges of the US immigration system, in that you have experienced both being undocumented and then becoming a naturalized US citizen who is now an elected member of Congress. So it's this really inspiring success story, this sort of American dream story. And we're at this moment where there are many who are concerned that the traditional narrative of the US as a country of immigrants who together create this diverse entrepreneurial American spirit is under attack. So just picking up on that theme, do you agree that it is under attack? And if so, what can be done to offset that?
There is no question that it's under attack. And we saw, even in my district, where you have a neighborhood in my district that welcome many German Jews from after the Second World War, the Fort Washington part of my neighborhood where Dr. Roof still calls home. We saw how that neighborhood now is also surrounded by immigrants from different parts of the world. And we had the presence of Europas, which is a white nationalist group in Fort Tryon Park, just a hop, skip, and a jump away from these two communities. The Jewish community that came after the war to settle there, and the very robust immigrant community that's very much part of the life of that neighborhood, and the abrasiveness for that group to come into that park and launch a anti-immigrant attack and spewed their hate right in the middle of New York City. We thought that that kind of action was just confined to Charlottesville, but it wasn't. They were right there. They took the A train to get up there. And this just shows how wide open we are to these kinds of attacks, right? And so everyone is hurt when one of us is hurt. And everyone is threatened when one of us is threatened. And of course, they chose this very particular neighborhood because they knew that it was an immigrant neighborhood, and it also had the presence of many survivors of the Holocaust, in fact. And so this was very strategically planned by them. And so this is the type of action that we see occurring in America, that people feel that they don't no longer have to hide their faces behind the hoods. And so this is a critical time, and we must protect the immigrant experience, but we must protect our Jewish neighbors. We must protect our Muslim neighbors. We must protect everyone that's part of the spirit of America that makes America, and of course New York City, a stronger city than many other cities across the country, because in our diversity we have our strength. But unfortunately, these are the times that this hate has been unleashed upon communities, and we must all come together to try to fight back.
Thank you. Daisy, if I can turn to you for a moment. You are a member of the Muslim American community. You're a prominent activist and leader and a face of the Muslim community. And the visibility and prominence of Muslim Americans has certainly risen over the last several decades. So in your estimation, how is your community doing? And again, I know you're not a monolithic community and you don't speak for everyone. I understand that very well, but how is the Muslim American community faring in today's America? And are there challenges that you think are particular to your community?
Well, thank you so much for inviting me. This is such an important conversation and a historic, important historic moment in the overall trajectory of what it means to be American. So my community specifically has been at the forefront of receiving the kind of challenges that other communities have faced before us. True, everybody has gone through, the Jewish community, the Catholic community, even African American community is still struggling. But there seems to be something very unique towards the Muslim community, in the sense that our very religion is under attack. It is seen as not even a legitimate religion. So therefore, if Islam is not a religion, it's an political movement. So therefore, denying Muslims the religious freedom is okay because it's not an American religion. So that's kind of at the foundation of where everything else emanates from. So we've seen anti-Sharia legislation when people don't even know what Sharia means, because they are trying to convince the ordinary everyday American that hijab is coming, burqas are coming, stonings are coming. So therefore you should, that because Islam is not a legitimate religion, Sharia is a foreign law. So therefore we must fight against this foreign law. So we've seen anti-Sharia legislations being legislated. The legislation has passed in I think about 12 or something states, roughly, I don't have the exact number. But that's on one front, which means basically that Muslims, are denied their religious freedom. We've seen the Muslim ban go into effect, right? We heard about it in such profound ways when Donald Trump said that, these countries from where Muslims come. So once again, Islam, because it's a political movement, is connected to terrorism in ways that other communities are not. So our religion is linked to terrorism. And because it's linked to terrorism, anybody who's coming from overseas is seen as a potential terrorist. So therefore we must keep people out. So the Muslim ban went into effect. Thankfully, gratefully for us, on July 22nd of this year, it was reversed. And it was done by bipartisan No Ban Act, marking really the end of the Muslim ban. And it was done because people of good faith, bipartisan people, came together on both sides. Interfaith communities came together because we've done so much work with the Jewish community, with the Christian communities, people of all faiths. They all came together. Activists came together, and close to 400 people had done a petition. I mean, I'm talking about. But that's how you fight this. So, and then there's crazy things like skewed patriotism, that if you're a real patriot, you should be banning You should be banning Muslims from coming. You should be caging immigrants because they don't belong here. Because true patriotism is standing up for white people. And then they're reversing integration. So there's like calls for reversing integration. Like, we don't even want to, make America impure by allowing anybody else to come in here. And oh, by the way, if you bring your own cultural nonsense to America, like halal turkey, or, or you're trying to promote certain kind of understanding, cultural understanding of Islam, then that is an imposition in American culture. This is the exact opposite of what has been the melting pot, the salad bowl, whatever you want to call it, that made America unique, because we were able to unite with the kind of diversity that we had. That is under attack, and that's under attack, and that includes Muslims as well as everybody else. And then, of course, there's this whole thing of us versus them. The in group is the special group, and everybody else is the out group. And the out group are Jews, Muslims, Blacks, immigrants. So all of us who represent, who are slightly do not have pure white blood, and also white people who are, sympathetic and do not believe in this, are also considered enemies. So this country is deeply polarized. So I'm worried on many fronts, but my community specifically has had its challenges.
Thank you. And I want to pick up on that too. And Congresswoman Clark, this notion of what is the American identity? So are our particularized identities as Jews or as Muslims or as Black or Latino, are those taking on a heightened sense of significance today? Should we be aspiring to refocus on the pluribus unum notion, this out of many one, or has this idea of particularism and a focus inward on our own communities superseded that pluralistic vision?
I think that what you have described are subjective, in that I know that in the district that I represent, there are a variety of philosophies, and it's based on one's lived experiences. So I have seen in my constituency an pluribus unum movement, if you will, where neighbors are very cognizant of one another, and everyone wants to fulfill their American dream, and they're willing to work together to do so. I think that when you have an immigrant community, it's only natural that as you acclimate to being in the United States, you gravitate towards individuals who are familiar to you, who have same cultural observances, who undergird a reminder of the old country, if you will, but who are all struggling at the same time to live a shared American dream. That does not negate e pluribus unum. It enhances it. And that's what I see in my constituency. Now, there are those who have used the cover of cultural unity, racial unity to for the most part, try to dominate others. And that may just be a human dynamic. However, when you add to it a white supremacy that has been sort of at the core of the founding of this nation, you live with this contradiction. You battle against this contradiction, and you focus people of goodwill towards the very what I call benign tenets of a constitution that gives guidance, is the barometer for how one lives their life in the United States of America. And if you believe in this democracy, you believe in the American dream, that out of necessity requires a sense of unity and a thriving towards that unity. Those who espouse hatred and division are incongruous to the words of the Constitution. And those who wrote the Constitution certainly did not have a pluralistic society in mind, but there was virtue in what they wrote. And if we can understand, if we can adhere, and then appeal to sort of the humanity, the collective humanity of our civil society, those of goodwill will ultimately prevail. So we start from that premise. We're not negating the hate, the fear, the division that has been emanating of late. But this has been part of the struggle of this nation. And at the end of the day, people of goodwill have to stand up, because nothing is guaranteed in a democracy. And if that is the case, then indeed, I believe we have far more people of goodwill than we have people who sit back and allow atrocity to occur. Many of the people who make up our communities come from nations, fled nations, where human atrocities made it impossible for them to live their lives in those spaces. And they came to America because of that beacon of hope. The fact that the American people have made room, have continued to expand their dream to include others. And so we have another generation that have become American. And that generation, I have embraced the pluralism and the diversity, and we have to continue to encourage that.
Thank you. Each of you in different ways are part of really wonderful, important coalition work that AJC has had a hand in. Congresswoman Clark, you're a member of the Latino Jewish Congressional Caucus, as well as the Black Jewish Congressional Caucus. Congressman Espaillat, also a member of the Latino Jewish Congressional Caucus. Daisy is a member of our Muslim Jewish Advisory Council that AJC co-convened with the Islamic Society of North America. So obviously we see so much value in this coalition work and are grateful to all of you that you do as well. But I'm interested in your thoughts, and this is really a question for all of you, and maybe Congressman Espaillat, I can ask you to begin. So I'm interested to know how we can be good partners to one another. We have a shared overarching goal of a pluralistic democratic society grounded in these shared values. But we also have issues that are of primacy or of key importance to our particular communities. And there sometimes can be tensions between our communities, even as we're working together to try and achieve a greater good. So how do we balance the larger issue and then also our particular issues? And what do you say to the critics or the naysayers who say, oh, you know, coalition work, you're wasting your time, they don't really care about us? How do we combat the naysayers within our midst? And Congressman Espaillat, I'll ask you to begin.
I think it's important that we highlight our commonalities and what brings us together, and the projects and ideas and values that we share, and how history has brought us together. For example, as a Dominican American, we must highlight the role that, for example, the Dominican Republic played in allowing the survivors of the Holocaust to settle in a small northern town in the island called Sosua before any other country did. In fact, you know, I worked in putting together an exhibit at the Holocaust Museum in New York City some years back called Sosua Island Paradise. And so not too many people know about that. So we need to highlight the positive things that we've worked on in the past, so that folks understand that there's a long history of collaboration and cooperation between different groups. And of course, that will pave the way for us to be able to address some of the issues that perhaps are kind of difficult often to discuss. But when you know that there's a history already there that links us together inextricably and in a very strong way, it makes it easier for us to then be able to discuss some of the more difficult items that are controversial in scope. But I think that as we move forward, more people will know about that. And I think that there's no other way but to build coalitions, at least not in my district, which is very diverse. And of course, in the city of New York and in the state of New York, it's critical that you have a coalition building before you get anything done.
Thank you. And Congresswoman Clark, I know you have to leave us in a couple minutes. So I'm just curious, do you receive pushback or criticism about the coalition work you do? And what's your response?
Well, I think that it response to me is as diverse as the individuals that I represent. And we're in a climate now where, those who are inclined to hate, to disbelieve, to be fearful are reinforced by others like themselves. And, there's nothing you can do necessarily other than to demonstrate to those individuals that whatever it is that they fear, whatever it is that makes them angry and upset, that they need to examine their own motives. And what I do is I recognize the humanity, the commonalities, the struggle that we have as a nation to make sure that we are acknowledging one another's experiences and what we have as commonalities. And then I say, for those who believe that that we can get through and live fulfilled lives by spewing hatred, you're essentially heading for disaster. No society has thrived off of hatred, none in the history of the world. And so I look to those who are willing, are focused, and understand that our lives are inextricably linked. As the Honorable John Lewis would say, we all live in the same house. And that it is critical as we look at the house that we're building together, that we recognize that the weakest brick in that foundation will determine the strength of that house. And that's why coalition building is so very important in the 9th Congressional District and across the nation.
Thank you. And Daisy, I mentioned the Muslim Jewish Advisory Council, MJAC. MJAC has 2 policy objectives: to combat the rise in hate crimes and to promote the positive images of Muslim and Jewish citizens of the United States. So I'm wondering if you could share with us what prompted you to want to be part of MJAC. What value do you see in this kind of coalition work? And then also, what do you say to those who challenge you for your participation?
Yeah, so, both our communities are targets of the white supremacy group, Jewish community being number 1 and Muslim community being number 2, and then, African Americans and then all immigrants. So that's their enemy camp. And so I have done a lot of work with the Jewish community over the years on other issues of trying to, build bridges and dialogue. But the rise of hate crimes that both these communities were subjected to, the rapid rise, like 67%, 57%, it really was alarming for both our communities because we are unique in the sense that we are roughly the same size and we're both religious communities. And so it was important for us, those of us who had built bridges, to come together as people of conscience to say, what can we do together to advocate for ourselves and to go to lawmakers and to sit with them and see if we can pass some legislation against hate. And so that prompted me because I know that AJC has deep roots in policy work and advocacy work. And so we knew that we were going to have, a tremendous success. Now, there are obviously political issues and there's always challenges. People question why you are doing this. It's really for our community here. We do not bring the overseas politics into the picture because that's something we just have to park on the side and think of how our communities here in the United States can benefit from the work that we are undertaking, and it has already benefited. So I also just wanted to mention what Representative Clark was talking about, and I really think that every American who comes here, whether they are living here, have been here for centuries, and newcomers, everybody is in pursuit of the same thing, and that is the American dream, right? We're always dreaming about how we can achieve this dream. And so I believe that there are lots of people in this country, although it may seem polarized, they're people of conscience. And Americans generally are fair-minded people. And those are the people that need to be brought together and to build coalitions with people who are people of conscience, who care, who don't want to see this divisiveness get broadened and spread. And out of those groups, we need to create deliberate collaborations like we did with MJAC, Muslim Jewish Advisory Council, specifically with a goal. But there are so many things that we can do collaboratively with one another. And specifically, I want to mention that there are a lot of community solutions out there, and I'm speaking to two representatives here, that usually it's impossible for us to bring it to the attention of the lawmakers. There's no way we can't just, so there needs to be a deliberate collaboration between our representatives with interfaith allies, good people who are doing the good work, and community activists who actually have real life solutions that are proven suites of community solutions, because we are looking at things, so for instance, we are publishing a booklet on white supremacy and how it poses a threat to everybody and specifically to Muslim community. Now we would love to have representatives speak at our summit, come take it seriously, see what it is, because it is a tool that is aimed at re-educating the public on the subject of white supremacy. It's not just a word. There are people out there and there are groups out there. And why are they joining these groups? Somebody needs to understand the whole picture in order to solve the problem at the local level. So the cooperation needs to be a little bit more deliberate, and it needs to include our representatives who are there representing us in Congress.
Well, let me just say to Daisy, all we need is an invitation.
Okay, great. You are there.
That's all we need. We meet with groups regularly, and I can tell you, as a woman of African descent, there is no community in New York City that has not understood the need for coalition building more than the Black community. That there isn't a community in the city of New York that the African American community understands what white supremacy means. And white supremacy takes a lot of different forms when it comes to African Americans. And so we're extremely interested in every respect in coalition building, because our lived experiences help to inform to a large extent what other people can expect in a society that has marginalized, discriminated, subhumanized, if you will, a group of people from its very inception. And so I think that there is a lot that can be learned from shared experiences. One being the experience of the indigenous of the United States of America, Native Americans, the African Americans. And my parents are immigrants to this nation, and they entering into the United States came in the 1950s as British citizens, because they came from the Caribbean where they were colonialized, right? So that history, that understanding, and coming to the United States from a majority person of African descent nation into a nation where, again, there's a caste system, a pecking order, a racial dynamic, makes one aware very quickly of what white supremacy can mean and will mean in the lives of people who, don't espouse that philosophy, that side to the American experiment. And so, Daisy, all you have to do is extend an invite, and I'm sure you'll have a lot of elected officials respond.
Thank you.
I feel like we just had a win on this call. That's great. Well, I want to just raise one other example of an area where I think all of our communities have come together, and it's the bill known as the No Hate Act that we have certainly supported. MJAC has supported. The Latino Jewish Congressional Caucus recently endorsed. We all know that if hate crimes are on the rise, if we don't understand the reality of the numbers, and if jurisdictions are not reporting their numbers and there's not any consistency in the reporting, which there currently is not, and if we're not creating incentives for different municipalities to report those numbers, we will never have an accurate picture of the reality of what's happening on the ground. So I just want to thank all of you for your support of the No Hate Act, because again, it really demonstrates how our communities can come together and advance a policy objective that will impact and help all of us. We need to move it forward. It hasn't yet become law, but we're working on that too. At this point, I think I'll turn it over back to my colleague Daniel, who has questions from our audience, and we'll have a little more time to chat about those questions. So Daniel, I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you, Melanie. Our first question comes from Nita Cooley in Sarasota, Florida. We often focus on the challenges we are facing as minority communities, but can you speak a bit to some of the recent successes for your communities over these past 4 years? And Representative Espaillat, we can start with you.
Well, I think that the ability to get HR 3545, which is the No Hate Act, in a bipartisan way, right? And to get that up and running and to ensure that we increase the reporting of hate crimes, and that is done in an organized and transparent way, and that law enforcement is trained to accept these complaints that we get from the average resident, the constituent. I think it's important that we document hate crimes and that we're able to address them in a proper fashion and an organized fashion. And so our ability to come together around this particular issue shows the success that we can have when we work together and when we reach out across the aisle.
Just want to, and I think Congresswoman Clark, do you have to leave? Or
I'm good for now. Thank you.
Great. Okay, good. So just give us a wave when you have to go so we can thank you properly, but I'll hand it back to you, Daniel.
Sure. And Daisy, I don't know if you want to respond to that as well, if you can speak to some of the recent successes from your community over the past 4 years.
Yeah, I would say that the biggest recent success was the lifting of the ban to stop the immigration. It was called the Stop Immigration from Muslim Countries legislation that was introduced, and it was named Terrorist Refugee Infiltration Prevention Act, which was, placing a moratorium on Muslim immigrants from countries with significant ISIS or Al-Qaeda presence. And so it affected Muslims. It affected, grandma from coming home. It affected people from reuniting with their families and meeting loved ones, going to funerals, weddings. It created all kinds of complications for the Muslim community. But on July 22nd, there was a bipartisan passage of the No Ban Act, marking the beginning of the ban. So that was a very important success, but it could not have happened without the collaboration of all the groups that came together. And literally, when they were on the floor, they were reading the name. They said, these are all the organizations that have signed on to this. And so it was a major success. The other success, which I think is a success in the sense that more and more Muslims are have decided to get politically engaged by themselves becoming representatives. You know, we have seen so many women come forward, and you know, we have Rashida Tlaib, we have Ilhan Omar, we have people in city councils, and it has spurred a lot of people to get, you know, engaged politically. And that's a very good development. Of course, I'm excited because there are a lot of women running, which is great because not only do you have the woman's vantage point, you also have this reversal of the stereotype that Muslim women are oppressed and suppressed and not allowed to do anything. So these are the women that are acting as role models for us and representing the interests of their community. So this is a really good development that I see across the board. All over America, you know, with the Muslim community. There are other, you know, smaller successes, but what is not a success and what is something that is depressing me, because I have two representatives here, is what's happening in Afghanistan as we are trying to push and retreat and get out of there, because, you know, our president wants to show that he's left and it's been a success story. The very people that we were supposed to defeat, the Taliban, are actually going to be back in power. So what did we do for the last 20 years? Why did we spend billions of dollars? Why didn't we demilitarize these people, which was one of our, you know, foreign policy goals? And we were supposed to empower women. And the very thing that we went to do, which was to empower women and to women give their rights, is going to be up at stake right now. So these women are, the Afghan women are petrified because you have a group of people that are not very educated, that don't know anything about their religion, that are now going to be able to impose their will on the entire Afghan population. And you've already heard stories about what's happening there. So I'm really worried about what's going to happen there. And we're rushing this peace deal so that we can, you know, put a bow on it and say, done, success.
I think I'm going to, just to keep us focused on domestic issues, because not to underscore the importance of that, Daisy, I think we can have another hour or 10 on foreign policy issues as well, for sure.
Yeah, got it. Thank you.
But thank you.
Representative Clark, our next question comes from Stephanie Toole in Milwaukee. You spoke about e pluribus unum, out of many one. What can we be doing to ensure that we are reaching across the aisle and building these important relationships with those outside our political parties and communities?
Well, you know, that's a very good question. I've been in Congress now for 13 years and 8 months, and I've seen the polarization of the parties grow stronger and stronger with each election cycle. And, you know, the idea is to find ways to build bridges around common cause. And unfortunately, the challenge has really been the leadership of the party. And when you have someone who leads a party, who is so divisive, who imposes a philosophy that is not in the self-interest of many Americans to pursue, it becomes difficult, very, very difficult to find common cause. For example, right now, we are struggling to get negotiations done to make sure that we can test, contact trace, and really abate this virus that is, you know, consuming all of us, irrespective of party, of religion, of race. And, you know, we're not getting any cooperation from Republicans at this stage. In addition to that, we know many are facing eviction. Many of the most vulnerable in our society are on food lines because they're food insecure. You know, evictions are just waiting. And we've not made the American people whole. We've not focused on that. And you know, I think Democrats are united. We think that certainly when humanity is at play, that there is no room for separation or for partisan fighting, because life is at stake. But we have colleagues on the other side of the aisle that don't share those values. So when you don't have any space for shared values, it becomes extremely difficult to get that bipartisan majority that you'd love to see advancing the well-being of the American people. Right now, unfortunately, that's not the case.
So to remind our audience, AJC will be having similar conversations next week on the sidelines of the Republican National Convention, where we will be asking many of the same questions and giving our Republican colleagues a chance to respond to some of these too. So I do hope people will tune into that as well and hear, and we can reference some of these conversations, certainly. I'm interested also in, we are also in this moment in this country in the wake of the death of George Floyd, where we've seen this national movement, national protests that have really lasted for months. I live in Louisville, Kentucky, and the death of Breonna Taylor is still an unresolved wound, both in the country and the nation, but the protests continue daily. So we know that we've seen this before, where there is a groundswell of support, there's a protracted period of protest, and then things kind of settle back down. And I'm wondering if you think, and I'll start with you, Congresswoman Clark, if you think this moment is different, and if so, why? And if not, why not?
I think this moment is different. I think the COVID-19 pandemic has laid bare some of the deepest flaws in our civil society, and it's rooted in, again, the original sin that has sparked hatred and division in this nation for generations now. And what is so heartening about this moment is that you see the collaboration and coalition building that has become sort of the hallmark of this particular period in time, the Black Lives Matter movement. In places across this nation, you'll see Black Lives Matter movement that doesn't even have a Black person marching in it. You know, that says to me that there is a generation or a number of generations that have come together now to say enough of this bigotry, enough of this hatred, enough of the type of actions that have taken life in this nation strictly based on racial hatred. And that is so uplifting, and I don't expect that it will abate. I know that those who have marched have not marched in vain, and that they expect to see results. We just happen to be in a political cycle right now, but when the dust settles from the combination of movement, of elections and everything else that are taking place, we have a lot of work to do. So I think that we're going to see continued work in that space. The House of Representatives moved very swiftly to pass the George Floyd Policing Accountability Act. It's passed in the House of Representatives, and it's waiting for the Senate to act on it. If the Senate doesn't act on it, again, you know, it becomes a part of sort of the discussions around the elections coming up. And, you know, people are going to be held accountable. I don't think that, you know, given the generations that we see out there protesting, that this will fade away, especially because it's precipitated by the overtly racist policing policies that have meant life and death for Black people in particular in this nation for generations. And people can't live their lives in fear that their life will be taken innocently for any reason by those who protect and serve them. And because you can't live in that space, you have to work until you can live in a space that recognizes your humanity in the same way that every American's humanity is acknowledged, and that policing practices have transformed in a way in which we can put the chapter of police brutality, police abuse, police killing in the past. And until that happens, I don't see there being a letting up of this movement, or a unwillingness of elected officials to do what they must do to rectify it in policy.
Congressman Espaillat, anything you'd like to add to this?
Of course, I also think that this is a different moment because, as Congresswoman Yvette Clarke said, there is a big and broad coalition out there in support of these reforms. And also, in addition to that, I think there are legislative packages at the local level, at the municipal level. For example, in the City Council of New York City, there are several pieces of legislation that have been passed. At the state level, there's a package of legislation, some of which have already been approved. And of course, at the federal level, we worked and we voted for reforms that I think are historic and will change the way policing is done across the country. So the young people and folks marching in the streets are not just calling for justice. They are very much aware of these legislative initiatives that are on the table, that are being discussed to change things. And then, so this is important, right? That when you say that Black Lives Matter, you know also that there is an anti-chokehold bill in our federal package, that there are initiatives there to ensure that police are more transparent and held accountable. There is a Camera Act that will have body cameras. There is changing the actual language that very often contributes to verdicts that are favorable to the police in clear-cut cases like the Garner case, where you saw Eric Garner ask, to be let breathe because he was choking. 11 times he did this, and we saw it with our very own eyes. And then we were like surprised to see that the judicial process, did not pan out the way we saw it on the camera ourselves. So the language of the law allows for that to happen, and we've changed that. So there's a host of legislative initiatives that will guarantee greater transparency, and will guarantee that the average resident, any of our constituents, could feel safer when they call the police, that is not going to end up in a homicide. So this is critical. Beyond the movement of the fact that Black lives really truly matter, we must see some substantive changes to the law. And I think the Congresswoman and myself worked hard on that, and people recognize what we're fighting for.
Daisy, do you want to add to this?
Yeah, I think this is a truly seminal moment. And in addition to what has already been said, I think that what's unique about this moment is that people are not waiting for it to be handed to them. I think that is very clear because we have a generational shift. Many protesters who were typical protesters are being united by people from other causes, because people from other causes see in this movement the same thing that they are fighting about: injustice, equality, and so this is why you have so many groups coming together. There's something else which is interesting. There's widespread public support. There's public awareness because of the way, because of the death of George Floyd and the way it happened. There's this whole new consciousness, and because of the pandemic, everybody was observing, reflecting, whole new consciousness that made people realize that maybe we have sanitized this history of colonialism and we really need to look at it differently. I mean, I read an article by a woman saying, oh my God, I need to throw out all my books and I need to replace them with anti-colonialism books. And then you have entertainment industries that are trying to humanize Black people, and they're recommending movies to you. So people who didn't even know who Black people were, had no interaction with them, are now watching movies and saying, oh my God, I didn't realize it happened to them. So there's a whole new level of consciousness. Many people are coming forward to rewrite the script. And that's why I think we need to stay on this moment and keep the pressure on, because we can't let it up because there's too many people waiting for something big to happen now.
It's the ultimate, I think it's the ultimate manifestation of American white supremacy. And that's why so many different people can relate to it. Because if you can watch an officer sworn by the law intentionally suffocate a man with his knee, that can be that can give license to neo-Nazi groups.
Mm-hmm.
That can give license to other manifestations of white supremacy, supremacy that is Islamophobic. That gives license to and empowers those who try to veil their hatred, because if you had not had an opportunity to view that video, there would have been a whole nother narrative that came out about why George Floyd died. So I think this is a transformative moment because so many people have been injured in such a short period of time by, a tolerance of anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, racism, misogyny, and, people of goodwill don't want their children raised in an environment that promotes that.
Well, I'm looking at the time, and I want to just say thank you to all three of you. I think we have so much work to do together, and we have so much learning to do together. And I know the Jewish community will continue to learn from all of you, and hopefully we can also be learning alongside you together as we move forward to try and create this more perfect union in which we all want to live, the community of conscience in which we all want to live. But we're really grateful to all of you for your partnership and for your participation today. And I will turn it back to you, Daniel, for some concluding remarks.
Thank you, Melanie. And thank you everyone for that fascinating and important discussion and for taking time out of your busy schedules to be with us. I would also like to thank our audience for joining us today. And to register for upcoming AJC at the Conventions programming, please visit www.ajc.org/conventions. Thank you again, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.